Good afternoon. Welcome to the Perez Art Museum, Miami. My name is Marie Vickles. I'm the Director of Education, and I'd like to welcome you all today to the museum and for this wonderful program. We're really excited. So as we kick off Miami Art Week, I want to thank everyone that's here, also to those that are joining us live on YouTube. Thank you. A few acknowledgements before we get started with today's program that is featuring artist Gary Simmons in conversation with curators René Morales, Jadine Collingwood, and Franklin Sirmans. A very special thank you to Deborah and Dennis Scholl for their ongoing support of this important lecture series. An additional thanks and acknowledgement to Hauser and Worth for their support for today's special presentation. And also, I would be remiss if I did not thank the incredible team of people that have worked so very hard to produce not only today's PAM education program, but also this incredible exhibition. I would like to acknowledge Anita Bram, Associate Director of Adult and Public Programs, David Miller, Education Coordinator, and our world-class audio-visual team, Denise Faxis, Andrew Bird, and Lazaro Yanis on video and cameras. We could not do this without you all. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get the program started with some brief introductions of our featured speakers. And here we go. All right. Gary Simmons, born and raised in New York, Gary received his BFA from the School of Visual Arts in 1988 and his MFA from Cal Arts in 1990, studying under the tutelage of Charles Gaines, Michael Asher, Catherine Lord, and others. One of the foremost artists of a generation which emerged during the late 1980s and early 1990s, Gary Simmons has achieved wide acclaim over the past 3 decades for his work which explores the politics of race, class, and social stereotypes through painting, sculpture, sound, and architectural environments. Gary uses imagery drawn from popular culture to create works that address personal and collective memories. Notable for his early application of conceptual artistic strategies, Gary exposes and analyzes histories of racism inscribed in U.S. visual culture. Over the course of his career, Gary has revealed traces of these histories in the fields of cinema, literature, sports, music, architecture, and urbanism, while drawing heavily on popular genres within those fields, such as hip-hop, horror, and science fiction. Gary's work has been featured in exhibitions both nationally and internationally, with highlights including Thelma Golden's landmark 1994 Black Male exhibition at the Whitney Museum, Franklin Sirmans' 2014 Prospect Triennial in New Orleans, and Okui and Wenzor's All the World's Futures for the 2015 Venice Biennale. In 2021, Gary was appointed National Academician by the National Academy of Design. He is a recipient of the Joyce Alexander Wien Prize via the Studio Museum of Harlem, the USA Gund Fellowship, the Penny McCall Foundation Grant, and the InterArts Grant via the National Endowment for the Arts. Jadine Collingwood is an associate curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. She holds a PhD in art history from the University of Chicago, where she completed her dissertation, A Tragic Suburban Mentality, Managerial Lyricism in Contemporary Art. Jadine's research interests include 20th and 21st century art, feminist theory, performance art, sculpture, and new media. Her dissertation considered the work of Liam Gillick, Matthew Barney, and Pierre Huyghe within the context of 1990s era neoliberalism and the development of networked communication technologies. At the MCA, Jadine has curated projects including Chicago Works, Caroline Kent, Martine Sims, She Mad Season 1, and previously she worked at the Walker Art Center, where she was a part of the curatorial team for several exhibitions, including the major retrospective Sia Armajani, Follow This Line, with Victoria Sung. The group exhibition, The Body Electric, with Pavel Peace, and the multidisciplinary exhibition, The Paradox of Stillness, with Vincenzo Del Bellis. Prior to the Walker, Jadine was an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow at the Art Institute of Chicago, where she assisted with the exhibition's design episodes, The Modern Chair, and Helena Almeida, Work is Never Finished. René Morales is the James W. Alsdorf Chief Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, which he joined in 2022. His first exhibition for MCA, a major career survey of the work of Gary Simmons, Public Enemy, which is here opening today, opened in June 2023 and subsequently has traveled here now to the Perez Art Museum, Miami, where he previously served as the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Chief Curator. At PAM, René was with us for 16 years where he organized countless programs and nearly 60 exhibitions, including Christo and Jean-Claude, Surrounded Islands, Der Friedman, Perfect Stranger, Sarah Oppenheimer, S281913, Susan Hiller, Lost and Found, and Global Positioning Systems, selections from PAM's collection, to name only a few. With the support of the Knight Foundation, René spearheaded the acquisition of over 300 works from the Sackner Archive for PAM's collection, along with other notable acquisitions that included major works by Helio Ochisica, Carlos Cruz Diaz, Dan Vo, Virginia Jaramillo, and Gabriel Orozco. René is a 2019 recipient of the prestigious Center for Curatorial Leadership Fellowship and has served as a juror for multiple prominent awards and grants, including the Whitney Museum's 2019 Bucksbaum Prize, and currently sits on the board of the Christo and Jean-Claude Foundation. Franklin Sirmans, Director of the Perez Art Museum, Miami since 2015, is an internationally recognized art critic, editor, writer, and curator. Franklin is one of the leading voices in contemporary art, and in his time at the Perez Art Museum, Miami, he has facilitated the acquisition of more than 1,000 works of art by donation or purchase, while pursuing the vision of establishing PAM as the People's Museum. Prior to his appointment at PAM, Franklin was the department head and curator of contemporary art at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, from 2010 until 2015, where he organized exhibitions that include Toba Kadori, Noah Purfoy, Junk Dada, Variations, Conversations in and Around Abstract Painting, Football, The Beautiful Game, and Ends and Exits, Contemporary Art from the collections of LACMA and the Broad Art Foundation. Franklin has also served as a curatorial advisory committee member at MoMA PS1 and was the artistic director of Prospect 3, New Orleans in 2014. Now, in his 8th year of leading Miami's flagship art museum, Franklin continues to make a compelling impact on the world of contemporary art. So with this incredible lineup, I feel like we need like a drum roll or something. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Gary Simmons, Jadine Collingwood, René Morales, Franklin Sirmans.
Wow. There are moments you dream about but can't quite imagine, but you just can't really see how do I get there. There's one of those moments. Oh my God.
It does feel very epic. I mean,
Woo! I'm coming to you in a second. Well, it's great to see everybody here. Just want to add my thanks, as Marie mentioned, to the Scholls, to Dennis and Deborah for doing this lecture series, starting this lecture series. I want to just also acknowledge all of the lenders and funders of the exhibition and people who are in here right now, and I don't want to forget anybody, so just raise your hand. I know you had a lot of people had a lot to do with this exhibition. Okay, you're shy. Thank you. Thank you. Don't be shy. I see you, Patty Clay. And as I mentioned that, I'm reminded of the fact that we are here to talk about Gary Simmons and his work, but we wouldn't be here without our board and trustees, and our staff, our amazing staff, and Marie mentioned many of them, but together we make these things happen. I got my board president over here, Luke Palacio. Thank you, Luke. And I could go on, but we're not going to do that. And we are going to talk about Gary, and we love and honor artists. I know there are many in here tonight, but we're not going to begin with you today.
That's okay.
Is that all right?
That's okay.
All right. So it's been a long time that we've been talking about this work, but I want to talk about René Morales for a second.
Please.
René, welcome home. Bienvenidos.
Thank you. Thank you.
And each of you, bring something to this conversation, but we're here in a way because of something that you started a long time ago, and here specifically in this building. So I just want to ask you, how did you come to the work?
Well, I can pinpoint it. 2006, I was wandering around Chelsea, and I walk into the Bowen Foundation, and I see this installation that consists of these 3 epic wall drawings, red, green, and blue. It's titled 1964 by Gary Simmons, and I was just blown away. The more time I spent with these images, picking up references to Philip Johnson, Robert Morris, Alfred Hitchcock, I started realizing, God, this is really deep, profound, complex, intense work. And I walked out of that place and I was just kind of like a little bit dazed, and I see Gary and a bunch of other artists just standing around in a circle, and we started talking, and that was it. We got to know each other, and then, what was it, in 2014, I invited you to come and do a new commission of a wall drawing in the double height space just around the corner from here. So, yeah, in a way, it's been a long time coming.
Long time.
I mean, in fact, we started working on this exhibition quite a while ago and had a little pandemic in between.
A little thing, yeah.
I can remember having lunch with all of, the 3 of us before Jadine came on.
I remember.
And we were, discussing the exhibition. It was a while ago. You had, of course, already done the installation in the building, but this idea of coming to a more expansive survey show is something that you've obviously brought us to for quite some time. And I think importantly, to say the connections between MCA Chicago are it's almost uncanny. I mean, the first large survey of Gary's work was at MCA Chicago in 2002.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah,
so
this was
we're
supposed to
playing-
mark the 20th anniversary on the nose, but the pandemic had something to say about that, so we missed it by a year, 21 years. So.
Exactly, but we were also fortunate enough in thinking through the collaboration of our 2 institutions to then have Jadine come on to the curatorial team. And Jadine, I just want to ask you how that came about within the context of Chicago.
Yeah, like you said, we've had a kind of the MCA has had a long-standing relationship with Gary. So I think when our current building opened in '96, we commissioned 2 wall drawings in the atrium.
That's right, yeah.
And then you did this project called Sky Erasures, which is really, really beautiful piece where Gary hired a skywriter to go up in the sky and draw some stars.
Yep.
And then, very true, I think, to your practice, right? You would kind of see the image and then it would just kind of blow away. And then we did a solo show in 2002 and then this show. So it just made so much sense, I think, to have the work in Chicago. And then it just kept on, I feel like all these coincidences kept on happening. So then René was working here at PAM and was working on this show, which was meant to then tour to MCA. So we were going to be the second venue. And then it turned out that you joined us in Chicago. So we stole René. Sorry, Franklin. But I think also just the way that René is such a kind of generous and really humble, person. Was just like, I hate it when like the junior curator like goes in and like has to do all the work, and then like someone else takes it. She was like co-curate the show with me. So that's kind of where I came on. And so it was already kind of coming together. There had already been like so many conversations, I think, amongst you all. But I just kind of jumped in and joined the fray. So.
I'll just mention there's a third person, Jack
Yes.
Schneider, who is, I believe is in the air right now, who just absolutely played an incredibly crucial role, assistant curator at MCA Chicago. So, I mean, when I got to MCA, it was just clear there was there were just these incredibly brilliant, incredibly energetic young people that it's already been so enriching, and the time that I've been there to work with you all. So, anyway, we can go on and on.
And shout out to Madeline Grinstein with that in mind, the director of the MCA Chicago. Can we get the images? I think what we have is a loop. We're just going to loop, and obviously we're here at the museum with the amazing works on view, but there's some other things you guys put in there. You also have put together, and I think it's just as integral, of course it's the thing that lasts the longest, is a pretty amazing catalog with 4 or 5 different essays, a chronology, images from all over the place, and really covering many years. And so we're fortunate for that. But what I'd like to do is give a little sense of when and how we enter Gary Simmons as an artist. And I'm speaking from a objective distance, right? Like,
Yeah, that is true.
Tell me, like, what was the first inspiration? Give us that origin story of being a kid that wants to be an artist.
I don't think you know that you want to be an artist per se. I think when you're a little kid and you're just that kid that sits in the classroom, like scribbling when you should be listening. And, for me and my particular thing was I used to draw on the walls in my house behind the sofa. And it was kind of sneaky like, and my parents discovered it, and my mother was like, oh God, I wonder what your father's gonna do about this. And, it kind of, they basically were just like, let him do his thing. We have paint. Benjamin Moore is around, so let's just paint it out and just let him do it. And I think that kind of is a funny story, but it's also one of support that is unusual, especially as a first generation, West Indian kid in Queens, New York. It was, the support there. When your parents come from the West Indies or wherever, the idea is, and you're reminded about that constantly, is like, we came here for you, so don't forget that. And you're assigned to be like a lawyer or a doctor or a finance guy or something, some making money type shit.
Right.
And so when you step to the front and go, yeah, I want to be an artist, they're like, what do you mean? Like, like an artist? And I can remember like washing the car with my father and him saying, so what do you want to do now? And you want to be an artist? And I said, yeah. And he said, you prepared to have no money and live hand to mouth? And I said, yeah, I don't care what I have to do. If it's, wash dishes or do whatever, and as long as I can paint, I'm good. And he said, all right, well, we're behind you. And so without that support, there would be no Gary Simmons, and I think that is essential to, I do it with my daughter. It's that's what you love to do, that's what you should do.
Right on. That's it. I mean, that's the foundation. So you said you were prepared. You told your father you were prepared. And I think I met you when you were in that prepared stage, right?
Yeah.
The eating beans
Eating
stage,
beans,
right?
a lot of red beans and rice. Yep.
I mean, the rice was like the extra part.
I want to hear
Beans
your
was the
origin
extra
story.
part.
But so just for the sake of it, so puts us, I guess, I don't know, end of the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s.
Yeah.
Paint a picture for us a little bit, if you will, right? So Jadine and René have broken the exhibition up into these incredible thematic sections, and we see things that give us a narrative to walk through. We've played with that narrative. It's a little bit different in Miami than it was in Chicago, but we begin with a room of works that touch on sport, but always sport with like a small s. It's a big metaphor for everything else, and so that began to happen when you were in that phase of, I've got a little bit of education, I have a sense of who the people are, right? And I think that's really important for you, obviously, in this conversation, is you're not walking into like a vacuum. It's not about just, I feel the need to create, I'm going to create, I don't care what's going on or what the structure is for the presentation of that work. I'm fully aware of it. And you're in New York City. Tell us how the first works really came about and where your interest was.
Well, I mean, you got to understand, like, growing up, we didn't go to museums and whatnot. I didn't really know about art until I knew I liked to draw, and I knew I'd paint anything, and I thought I was going to customize vans and motorcycles. That's really what I thought I was going to do. And in high school, I did customized cars and vans and sprayed lots of naked ladies on the sides of vans, and you'd always get that guy with the glasses with the tape that's like, and you're like, you want them bigger, don't you? And you'd have to break out and start spraying it, and you'd sit there and go, dude, no woman that is gonna get in this car. Like, this is just not gonna happen. But you'd have to do it, and so, there it is. You got paid for it. And then, this guy owned this custom shop that I worked at, and I used to do these, in my spare time, I would do little murals on the crumbled up fenders and things in the back. And he'd come back and smoke a cigarette, and he'd look at that, and he'd go, God damn, dude, you're good. And I was like, I told you, this is what I want to do. And he said, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, I think this is it. This is what I want to do. I want to, like, customize cars and what a lot of you would think of as pimp my ride. So, he was like, nah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You should go to art school. And if you go to art school and graduate and get out and you still want to do this foolishness, I'll back you. I was like, all right, well, bet. That's cool. I'll know how to paint better. And, So I got there, and the guy's name was Tom, what was his name? Tom something, Mulaney, I think. And I don't know where that guy is, but I got to thank that guy. Because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have gotten to SVA. And I wouldn't have met, Jack Whitten and, Jackie Windsor and all these people. Then later on, I went to Cal Arts and met, Michael Asher and all these kind of people. But the thing was I got out of school, when I was at SVA, I didn't know a lot of artists. It wasn't like there was this circuitry that you could just know. I knew David Hammonds and I knew Adrian Piper, and they looked like me. And that was it. And everybody else was a sea of male white faces. And so I was trying to, move through minimalism and conceptualism, but find a way of having my own voice. And that's really where a lot of this work all stems from. But there was a huge scaffold of support to help me get to where I am. You don't do this stuff all by yourself. It's not possible. You need people like you guys on the stage. You need like serious support. You need like, I have a wife that's sitting up in the back that's like, we've been together since art school. Without her, I wouldn't be able to be sitting here doing this.
I'm just going to say the same right now because she's sitting right next to my wife.
She is sitting right next to wifey.
Get that out of the way. Thank you. I'm going to spin it over here. René, how do you take, we've talked a little bit about the formative or what Gary got to creating work and to creating bodies of work. You do something with your catalog essay that, I've looked at the work for 30-something years and have never seen the trajectory put together the way that you have. And it's so eloquent and so inclusive, although there are a couple of pieces I wish we had. And I know you feel the same way. But tell us how you began to think about this big career and how we see it in a narrative fashion.
It's funny because so when Gary was here, what was it, 2014, right? When we worked on the double height space together, we were walking through. There was an Larry Ward show at the time, and I said, Gary, it would be amazing to do a survey of your work, but we would need like a 60,000 square foot space because his work is big, and Gary has been very, very productive. There are lots of series there. So I would say the biggest challenge, and I don't know, Jadine, I think you would agree because you did a lot of the cutting for the end. One of the biggest challenges with the show was cutting, trimming, deciding what not to put in. And that was very much the case as I was writing. I had one of those situations where it was like, I spent I don't know how much time writing. I had written maybe, what was it, like 9,000 words already.
Oh no, it was
and I was
way
up to
more
like
than
1992. And I still had like 30 years left of production to talk about it.
You were in five figures at least in terms of
this
the work
essay
count.
was epic.
Yeah.
It ended up being, it was painful, but we had to cut it down. But it was, so it was just very hard. What I can tell you is that Gary's work, it's besides all those things, it's also very varied. Whether it's an internet piece or an installation or a sculpture or wall drawing or painting, there's this incredibly consistent and strong conceptual thread. There's this arc that just kind of ties it all together. So that made it a lot easier, I think, in deciding what. It made it a little easier a little less painful to let go of some works that we had to let go of, because at least the integrity of that was the important thing, to protect that arc, the integrity of that arc and the readability of that arc.
I want to segue from there. Jadine, you say something in the catalog that picks up off of what René just mentioned about, these moments conceptually that go throughout the work. So I just saw it for the first time in some ways today when we were looking at the us and them robes. And then you get to the room, the first real cinema room with Planet of the Apes, with Amityville, with Deliverance, and it's like, oh, us and them, damn. It's all over the place and in so many different ways. And you talk about these binaries in the work, so I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit on that. Obviously, the first room is so dependent upon presence, absence, which is something you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always, I think, what is, such a great part about Gary's work, right? Is it always kind of is this and that at the same time. It's, that first space, we're thinking about, sports and the kind of spectacularization of, in particular, the black male body. But then it's not there, right? So you kind of remove it from view. And so that kind of addition and subtraction, I feel like it's really a kind of thread throughout the work, whether it's, both rendering an image and then erasing it. or, touching on, really kind of deep niche cultural reference, but that has a real kind of like universal significance to it, like, that connection between the robes, so the us and them, right, and thinking about how, we create an other outside of ourselves that then, you see in films like Deliverance or things like that. So one of the hard things I think was, trying to convey all of that kind of nuance and that depth of reference and, I know that you're such a cultural, savant in some ways, everything cultural, and figuring out ways to kind of dive into those stories without, basically putting a novel on the wall with the text. So we tried to kind of pull out and think about some of the kind of more general themes of the work.
Yeah, it's like the novels are in our heads. I mean, confronted by that room. I mean, I've been in there, a dozen times already in the last week. And I still can't quite, reconcile narrative, standing in front of lineup, taking in Everlast Champion and thinking about how it then plays into lineup. And then you mentioned the male figure, right? And so a shout out to Thelma Golden, obviously. 1993 Whitney Biennial is lineup, that's in there. 1995, 2 years later, same museum, Whitney Museum, Black Male Show, and Step in the Arena is in there. So with that in mind, boxing, the sweet science, writing is fighting, like, can you comment on the boxing aspect a little bit and how that fits into the sport role?
Well, sports as a whole, for me, sports is constantly referenced in a lot of my work because I use it not just because I'm a sports fan. I am a huge sports fan. I'm a big-time Knicks fan. Don't say anything negative about the Knicks. But I think for me, it's almost like sports becomes like a metaphor or a reference jump-off point to talk about larger issues. And boxing is the biggest, clearest example of discussing that in an arena, quite literally. So, you go all the way back. I think I just saw a picture of Jack Johnson, the politics of Jack Johnson from that period, what he represented, Joe Louis, Max Schmeling. Those kinds of fights were representative of a kind of world power struggle. And that representation of these two combatants going against each other on this world stage was one of the first times a black figure was representing the United States, and everybody got behind him because he was fighting Max Schmeling, who represented essentially the Nazi Party. Truth be told, Schmeling wasn't part of the Nazi Party; he was just adopted by that. But these are kinds of things, and it goes on and on and on. Sugar Ray Leonard, obviously Muhammad Ali. These were all like very political figures. That was a platform and a stage that politics can be discussed. Ali not going to choosing not to go to the war was a big, point of confrontation for people. And so I chose those kinds of things. If I choose baseball, I'm going to go into something like the Black Sox scandal from 1919, or something like the Steelers and the Raiders in the playoffs with the I forget the name of the play, but the point is I use it more as a reference point that people can find their own way, their own avenue into the work, to access the work in their own terms, their own politic. And that's the part where once I've got you in that place in your own head, then we can have a conversation. Yeah. Because if it's more of a representation of, say, me, like if it was a self-portrait, it's easier to dismiss what I'm talking about, or not so much dismiss, but actually say, okay, so that's his experience. But if I find this kind of placement to talk about that everybody from every different access point can get in there, now we're having a collective conversation, and that's really what I dig at. Sports is a real kind of place that everybody sits down in front of the Super Bowl. Everybody sits and watches that big boxing match. Cricket. My father was a cricketer in the West Indies, and so cricket has a certain kind of representation in the West Indies. It's the Queen's game, and so it lives beyond just the game.
Yeah. Oh, God, we could go so far there.
Yeah, I could keep going on that.
But that reminds me a little bit of the curatorial approach here. And I think both in Chicago, but certainly here, you consider the first piece that you see is a piece that's all about inserting the audience inside of the work, right? So when you come in the doors downstairs, you encounter the painted tarps and Polaroids of people who were posing in front of those tarps. We got that. When you walk into this space and the first thing you see is this beautiful, colorful wall of posters. Even if you can't make them out, they're attractive to the eye. And then you bring us through sport before we get to probably some of the more challenging work for folks, which 6X just happens to be up right now.
Cue.
Right? How did you guys think about that, approach that? I know we battled and talked and tried to figure out different ways of looking, and I think you guys came up with the ideal plan. So how did you get there?
We came up with the idea of what?
The ideal plan. How did you think through the curatorially how you take Gary's work from being that point? And Gary is one to, there's a beautiful video on the Hauser and Wirth site in which you talk about literally punching in the face with artwork.
Yeah.
So that's the desire. And so when you're playing with an artist's desire like that, you got to do different things curatorially.
Yeah.
How did you do it?
Well, I kind of want to turn it around because like part of that is like that the show starts with the Polaroid backdrops, and so we start with hip hop, right? And I want to know. And I got you guys both here. I know you guys know each other from way back. I'm wondering if you can kind of set the stage for like what the 80s and 90s was really like as a moment. And then I wonder, Gary, if you can talk about sort of how maybe that influenced the kinds of statements that you were making early on in your career.
I mean, hip-hop was, that was just an incredible moment. In music and culture and fashion and the way you talk, the way you carried yourself, the way that it carved out a certain kind of pride, right? And, I'm not going to really go into the beginning part, but I would say that I can tell you specifically the moment I heard Public Enemy for the very first time. And that was life-changing for every single person that was in that room. This is the first time I was in a club, and the DJ was mixing some great beats, and suddenly this sound wall came on, and it was the most powerful thing I think I'd ever experienced in my life. And it literally froze and stopped everybody in the club. You didn't know how to dance to it. You heard it was Terminator X, like using, steam kettles and bells and like all these like samples that you'd never heard of before in your life. You're just like, what the fuck is this? And then you just knew you were in the moment of like, oh, it's on, it's changed now. And then once Chuck just belted out this kind of anger, like this male anger with intelligence behind it, that it hit me in a way that I can't even describe, and it was sort of, you knew everything was going to change from that point. Every music, you had to, that was a standard that you had to live up to as a DJ, as a graffiti artist, as a fashion designer, as a whatever. You had to come up to that level. There was no time for this party house foolishness anymore. This was like, Public Enemy was the CNN of the black community, for real. And it was like, these guys are speaking for us, you know, and you had the side man, Flavor Flav, doing his craziness, and you had the S1Ws, which were, you know, they were kind of like, you know, the Black Panthers, and you're just like, God damn, this shit is tight. and once that, you know, my Uzi weighs a ton. I mean, oh my God, I couldn't believe what these guys were rhyming about. And for me, that was the moment where I realized that I did DJ, but I wasn't up to no Terminator X level. That's for damn sure. But I knew that I had to find a way to take images that I was into and infuse them and mix them the way that X was mixing music. And that's really what I say when I'm talking about visual DJing. It was taking snatches of images. A great DJ will have you moving to beats you've never even heard before. You could be listening to samples from Patsy Cline and, you know, Johnny Cash. And a really good DJ will put like a bass line over the top of that, and you're like, whoa, you know, what is that? And a lot of folks early on didn't realize that a lot of that music came out of like country music, it came out of reggae music, punk rock music. All of that was the bass line for all of early hip hop. And I thought visually, I have to find a way to do this. I have to find a way to taking things that are interesting to my experience and kids that look just like me and remixing that joint so that when you're in the club and you're hearing Patsy Cline or Pat Benatar or something, by the time you're able to mentally like place or find what that song is, that DJ's 3 songs past you already. He's already gone through Jackson 5 and Sly and the Family Stone and everything else, and your brain is just kind of trying to register. And I wanted to do the same thing visually, and that's really what visual DJing is for me.
Thank you.
Right on.
I think, you know, it's undeniable that one way to describe your work is that you provide just enough information, almost not enough, just enough information that and that way you invite the viewer to kind of go down this rabbit hole with you, rabbit hole of references, rabbit hole of knowledge. And that's where I see the visual DJing, you know, there's like sampling of all these different things.
Yeah.
You know, you look at an image and next thing you know, you realize that piece is a reference to Marcus Garvey, Talib Kweli, Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, you know, just going on and like going down this kind of rabbit hole, this tunnel. And I really respond to that in your work, almost to the point where it took me a while to realize that just as important as what's in the work is what's not in the work.
Yeah.
The fact that in many cases, what you're presenting is this empty space, this empty stage, right? That becomes a kind of a sponge. It absorbs meaning, and it prompts the viewer to kind of project their own ideas, their own assumptions about what this piece is about. And you know, for the longest time, for example, the Polaroid backdrops, for example, I thought were somewhat different in your work. Now I see them as completely related. It's just as there's a perfect dialogue between the Polaroids and the Black Ark. There's a perfect dialogue between the Polaroids and the empty space in your wall drawings. You know, you leave a lot of empty space in your compositions. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that resonate at all? Do you have a
Oh, 100%. I mean, you know, one of our friends that's no longer with us, who was like the griot, was Greg Tate. And I love Tate. And Tate used to say these things. He used to sit out on the corner of Broadway and Astor Place, and the world would just come to Tate. He would just sit there with his Carhartt on, and at some point, you were walking, if you were downtown, you walked past that corner, and you'd have this conversation. It was like being, it was like that house in the South where there's that old lady that sits on the corner, and you have to talk to her when you walk past. Tate was that guy, and he always had brilliant things to say. And Tate used to say, Gary, you are to hip-hop what Hammonds is to jazz. And I was like, whoa, that's like that's an insane compliment. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And he's like, well, Hammonds has this kind of improv to his work. And it's, it's all about those like kind of empty spaces in between things. Like he activates that space in between things. And Hammonds has this way where he'll pick up and take discarded material from the street that you've walked past. Old, bags of chicken with the grease on it, and, wine bottles and things. And you're more of like a DJ, like, DJ Premier or something like that. Like you're taking jazz licks, but you're putting them in a different context to show us what our world is right here, right now. And Thel used to compare, Thelma Golden used to, she'd say, well, back in the early 90s, Franklin can attest to this, we used to all have pagers. And we thought we were like gangsters, Some of us, like my friend here, had 2 pagers. I don't even want to tell you what the 2 pages were for, but some of y'all are laughing, so you know what 2 pages are for. So I used to have this pager, and if you wanted to get a hold of me, you had to know the pager number. Thelma was one of the few people that actually had this number. So everybody would get in touch with Thelma and say, hey, can you page him and then have him call me back? And so this was not like a created thing. I just didn't trust a lot of people, and Thelma was one of the few people that I trusted because she was like a sister. Am I right? And so I guess this kind of this myth that was created around that, she used to compare it to the way to get in touch with David, you had to call this chicken shack on 125th Street and leave a message there, and somebody would go running down the street to David's studio and say, hey, Marion Goodman's on the phone. And he'd be like, fuck that bitch, I ain't trying to answer no goddamn phone. And so he would take the message and do with it what he wants. And so she used to compare his calling the chicken shack with me and this pager. And I had no idea about that story. But I guess Tate knew about this as well, and he used to remind me of the same thing. But we got rid of those pagers. As far as I know, Frank, you still got your pager?
Nah, definitely not.
I kind of hope they make a comeback. Now that I think of it, I've never realized.
I loved
this,
pagers, especially
nice.
the clear ones.
It's
Remember the clear
less,
ones?
Yeah.
You were cool if you had the clear pager.
And it's a little bit less aggressive in terms of like getting you.
Yeah.
It's like it gives you a little bit more choice. So yes,
Yeah.
we'll get back.
You'd be hearing pagers going off,
Yeah.
like people looking at them and whatnot.
Anyway,
You had to have a cool way of looking at your pager too, like in your pocket.
yeah. And you can spell.
Oh my God! It's an
Unbelievable.
incredible analog moment. That applies readily to the Polaroids as well. I still
it
can't
does.
get over the fact that now we take a picture in front of those tarps on our own phone and keep it that way. So the whole transactional experience of the Polaroids is no more, but it's still a way of archiving, and we continue to archive even in different ways via Instagram. Come back for a second to the installation aspect. there is a room that probably would be a little bit more challenging as an initial room, which is the second room. Can you guys talk about that a little bit? We didn't talk much about that. There's this space of education as it relates both to the home and to the institution of the school.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a way that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Gary looks at sports, at B-movies, architecture, urbanism, music, these different fields, right? As places that are some of the channels in our culture by which we receive information, by which we receive our knowledge about what society is like, and in particular, these are the channels through which we learn about race and identity. It took me a long time. There's the things he's saying, but he's also pointing out the channels by which this information is relayed to us. And one of the most important channels by which we learn about race, about society, about identity is education, of course. I mean, if you think about 6X, the idea there with these Klan uniforms for children is that it's really at that first moment when you leave the home, the first moment when you go into society, when you start receiving ideas about prejudice, about bias. So the critique of pedagogy, the critique of the school system becomes a really important moment for you there. And that room, it's essentially a simulation, a simulacrum of a classroom. And if you really think deeply about these works, each one of them kind of points out different ways in which we are kind of formed, and our ideas about race, our ideas about society are shaped. Now, yeah, I think you were saying earlier, this is that's tough material. It's difficult to look at, and I think that gets to one of the most fundamental convictions in Gary's work, which is that on one hand, there's a valid argument to be said that we should just try to stop looking at this stuff. Let's stop letting it continue to harm. But I think, Gary, what your work says is that that's very dangerous. If you erase, if you forget, if you don't archive these painful memories, as painful, as hurtful as it is to look at them again, if they go away, if they do actually erase, if they evaporate like the 5-pointed stars in the skywriting project, it could happen again. So you're taking this very strong stance, and for us, we talked about this so much, and ultimately what we ended up saying was that, first of all, recognizing that there are other perspectives that are valid and strong, but we believe and we agree that the stakes are too high, that these are things that just need to be confronted. And if we allow them to be buried, we run the risk of these histories repeating, happening again.
Right on.
I don't know, Gary. What would you say? I mean, these are complex subjects, and what's amazing is how timely this is, right? I mean, we're talking about the AP courses, the textbooks. These are things. This is history that is playing out right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that educational work came, there was a few instances in my past that really came to that moment. And one of them was, I had a cousin from Jamaica, my cousin Colin, and he came to the States to visit me and was at school, and we started talking about different education. And I realized that I went to public school, and he went to public school in Jamaica, and he would go on about these issues about about world history and these kind of very deep conversations and knowledge of world history, an understanding that was not even close to what we were learning, at least in my experience. And it occurred to me, and I was like, well, you know, like, why is my education so myopic? And here's this guy from Jamaica has this understanding of, you know, this whole other part of the world and how it affects, you know, and he used to say to me, you know, America is not the only place in the world. Like, you know, there are other places, you know, and then you'd start to meet folks that speak 2, 3, 4 languages. My daughter has a friend that speaks 5 languages. And I was like, God damn, the idea, I can't even speak one properly, you know. And so it just occurred to me that I started to look at my own education and our education collectively and who has access to what. And you start looking at private school versus public school and who, you know, is financially in a place that they can afford to send their kid to those kinds of schools. And it really started to shape the way that I was looking at, you know, making some of this work and making commentaries on it. And I thought there's a piece that I did that's not in the show, unfortunately, called Polywana. And Polywana kind of set the tone, in a way, for a lot of the educational stuff, because Polywana basically was the front, essentially the front of a classroom. So it had a big chalkboard behind it, and a flag, and a clock, and a homeroom speaker, and then there was a podium, very much like this one, and on that podium is a cockatoo parrot, and it had a live mic. So the parrot was a trained bird, a Hollywood bird. So I didn't know what this parrot was going to say, if anything, but unbeknownst to me, the bird sits on the perch and gets on there, live mic, mic'd up. We're doing a little test in the gallery before the show opens. Bird starts yelling, "Fuck you! Fuck you!" And I'm like, what? And so then it's walking around and it's, "I love you, I love you. Lolita, Lolita," like all of these, and I'm like, what is happening here? So for the whole show, people would walk in and they'd hear this bird screeching "fuck you" at you. And I thought that was brilliant. It was like a Vito Acconci moment or something. And so, there was this constant questioning of, that piece for me was about, us parroting information to children and teaching them the same thing over and over, and that in that case the teacher could just as well be a parrot yelling "fuck you." So that's kind of where a lot of that work sort of stemmed from, those kinds of conversations, and I just sort of processed it. And truth be told, the cockatoo, even the idea of the cockatoo came into my brain because I love that show Beretta. And Beretta had like this really cool bird named Fred. And he would, Fred used to talk to him and everything. Some of you older folks might remember Beretta. But so, like, it's things like that, like little pieces of pop culture that recall, like somebody will go in and go, "Didn't Beretta have a bird?" "Yeah, man." You see, so it's always like little pieces like that are sneakily embedded in the work. And that's important because I think that as you drill down into the work, you can access it on multiple levels. You don't have to know who Beretta is or whatever if you see that. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't put that piece in the show because probably PETA would probably come after us for having a bird on a thing.
We actually did a big project with parrots a few years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think we had the
It's not very
wherewithal
friendly.
to do it again. Just have it, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So,
one thing I love
actually, René shied away from doing the bird, so I'll just blame it on him.
it was because of the earlier
Throw him
parrot project.
under the truck. But yeah.
And there's another element, not to digress, but there's another element to the story about Polywana, right?
Well, there is.
Love
Actually, Polywana, what makes Polywana so important was not only that story, but as I noticed when we installed it, I was working with this very small gallery that didn't have a lot of money, so they couldn't afford to ship this really heavy chalkboard. And I said, well, this is the centerpiece of this show. I have to do it. So how about if I paint the wall in chalkboard, and we'll put the bird in, do the thing, everything. And so as we put the bird in, she would like flap her wings, you know, just to kind of stretch or whatever. And I looked at it and I was like, what? That's incredibly beautiful. Like, it was the cinematic moment where it almost seemed like an acid trip or something, where you're seeing trails. I don't take a lot of acid, just so you know. But I've seen movies that deal with acid trips, so, you know.
Just a little.
So, you know, I looked at it and I said, wow, man, I have to, that gesture is incredible, because you're seeing it against this white wing against this like pitch black background. And I said, God damn, I gotta replicate that. So I like, put me on a plane early, man. I gotta get back to the studio. So I got back to the studio, and that's when I started doing the de-erasure drawings, because it all clicked for me right there.
It does. It totally clicks. I mean, think about that site, the podium, or in the case of this information supremacy board, the chalkboards with those desks like right in front of it. Like, this is a very charged site, right? This is the place. In a way, it's an allegory or a symbol, or it can be read that way, as the site where society passes on knowledge.
Yep.
But not necessarily reality, not necessarily fact. It passes down a version, its version of history, right? And in a way, that's an act of remembrance, right? Mm-hmm. So it ties in perfectly with this idea, this erasure effect that became such a distinguishing aspect of your work. This erasure effect that has something in it, kind of intrinsically, about grasping at something that is fading away, that you're in the process of forgetting, or maybe working really hard to try to conjure something that you can barely remember. Either way, the relationship between that site of exchange, that site of memory, and this visual effect is really compelling, and it becomes a really important seed in your work that you take in many different directions. But you can already see it there in that piece. That piece is 1989, I believe, very early.
I think, you know, that sense of memory is kind of in all of us. And I think that I'm really into cooking. I love to cook. And I cook all different kinds of foods. And I always remember, like, whenever I cook beef patties, I think of my grandmother. And I'll break them and I'll eat them. And, you can almost start to tear up, because the memory of that through food, you're consuming it, just the smell of the herbs and the peppers and the thing, and, you know, Scotch bonnet peppers and things like that, is so visceral and so strong that it's, you know, I can do the same thing with Italian food. When I cook Italian food, there was this old lady, my best friend's grandmother. She was one of those old Italian ladies that still was in mourning, so she had, like, you know, the kind of lace over her face all day, and she didn't speak a lick of English. And I would sit next to her and watch every single thing she put in the gravy. We called the gravies the sauce. Anyway, so I would watch and cook with her and learn just through being next to her. Every time I make sauce, I think of that old lady. And it's this strong memory back to that experience. And I think we all have that with whatever. You could be at a country fair eating churros, and you're like, wow, I remember going on the Ferris wheel with that first girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. And I find it interesting that we have these things like food that recall memory so strong that it's incredible. So I think that effect is something that I'm always after visually in work, is to tap into, not to be nostalgic. I'm not interested in nostalgia, because there's a line between that you cannot go over, and nostalgia and sentimental starts to get a little saccharine, and you don't want to go there. It's a razor edge down the middle. And if you waver one side or the other, suddenly the good humor ice cream truck becomes kind of corny. So you want to reference that ice cream truck, but you don't want to like go all in. So you have to know when to pull back, and that's the key.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that like the thing about your work is that I feel like it doesn't tie directly to it doesn't have to tie directly to a specific referent, right? And so you don't have to have seen the Bosco cartoon in order to feel that it's familiar to you, because that's like one of the operations of culture is that these ideas, these images, even if it's not direct, they still linger in the things that we see currently, right? And so there's a way that like you could have never seen a Bosco cartoon and it still looks familiar to you.
Totally.
I think that's like a really important kind of aspect of the work, is that kind of familiarity with something you haven't even encountered before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see it in music, right? Like you look at something like A Tribe Called Quest. You look at something like Black Star with Mos Def and Talib Kweli. You look at somebody like DJ Premier. These guys are using the history of music in a way that is, you don't even have to have a deep, rich understanding of jazz, but it makes that experience so much deeper. This is not a superficial thing, and they're reconstructing sounds and samples for you. And that's what makes them great. That's what makes hip-hop great, is that it has that kind of layered form to it, that you have forms of access. Newer producers, I don't feel like they're putting in the work in that kind of way. There are a few, but it's not as important, it seems, to a younger generation right now. Right now.
And you know, that way of working where you're, in a way, instead of generating a new image or a new sound, it's more about looking backwards and seeing like the entirety of human cultural production as a kind of a menu for you to choose from.
Yeah.
Pick and choose, bring it together. The visual DJing thing, the sampling thing. You know, you're working that way, going back to the 80s or 90s, but like that way of working, that way of thinking, and that way of thinking about our culture, it just feels so contemporary, right? It feels so fresh and so new, and like, and what else? I mean, think about the Polaroid backdrops, right? Talk about, you know, this idea of like providing an opportunity for folks to take control of their own image, to take control of how they themselves are being represented. That is, to me, I see resonances of that in all over our culture, all over our internet culture, at least in its best form. You know, it's about taking control of your own image. In its worst form, it's about having your image in a way taken away from you, even more efficiently. But anyway, yeah, it's really incredible to me how this kind of arc between your early work and the current work, and what the world was like in the 90s and what the world is now, and seeing just how incredibly timely and how important it is to be thinking about these conversations right now.
Thank you.
Yep. Jadine, René, Gary, thank you. We got 30 plus years of work here. Ooh, I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Anita, do we need a mic or no? Okay.
I'm so happy that we touched on the subject of there's so much more going on beyond what we see. And I'm very fortunate we have a beautiful painting in our office. And every time, it's outside my office, and every time I pass the painting, it's minimal. And I want to call you and I say, I wish God is here so I can ask him what else is going on. All the time, doesn't matter what, there is so much beyond the minimal of what you really are putting out there. So I'm very grateful to learn much more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana.
Yeah, congratulations. You know, I was wondering if you see your work, or as part of the intention, part of a tradition of Black radical art, which, by the way, I know nothing about. I'm totally new to this, but because I look at disinformation, and to me it reads as a sort of the institutionalization of the divide, of the divisions in this country, right? Not just with black and white, but it's like poor, rich people, institutionalization of division. And then I look at, I call them the redneck bobbleheads. What's the name of the piece? I'm sorry. But you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, the deliverance bobbleheads. And I'm like, and that, you know, and how that relates to the normalization of white supremacy in popular culture. But I look at these pieces and I was moved to tears, you know, frankly, because I grew up in Florida. I grew up in Jacksonville. I grew up redneck, which is not a pejorative, proud redneck family, but part of being redneck is this intentional ignorance of all the painful parts of American history. Right? We're proud to be American, but it's our definition of American. But there is that kind of resistance to popular culture that is so pervasive, and I get angry, you know, and I feel very motivated. But is that part of the intention of some of this work to sort of maybe not necessarily radicalize? Maybe that's too strong a word, or I don't know. Maybe it's appropriate, but that there's this feeling that, you know, I get, you know, when I see these works. Like, congratulations to you folks. Congratulations to Jack, because I think that the dialogues between these pieces, it is a very important message that I would like to see in more institutions these days. Thank you very much.
Oh, we got one more right here in the middle.
The still.
The still. The barrel, the sculpture, and
What aspect of what would you like me to speak to? The still, how do I describe it? The still comes from, I'm always fascinated by people that, the idea of being inebriated, and I don't mean like at a cocktail party with a little too much champagne. I mean like truly blackout drunk, like wasted. And the idea about being outside of your body, that there's this need to escape the self. And I'm fascinated by that. And so that body of work was all about drunkenness and drugs. And in that piece particularly, I was really interested in the kind of myth of the still and what it means, because it's sort of an object that exists in our minds collectively. Everybody kind of, you know, you say still and an image comes up, but I guarantee you they're all very different images of what that is. And so what I did was I started to research old confiscated stills and like police confiscated stills from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, that kind of thing. Because there are these objects that create this, you know, moonshine, which is also a kind of mythical sort of drink. And they're made kind of in a hidden way. They're made in basements and garages and, you know, people's bathtubs and out in the middle of a field, and they explode, you know, very much like meth labs. Yeah. Like, you think you know what a meth lab is, but you don't really know what a meth lab is. You just know that this drug is produced out somewhere in the middle of nowhere, probably in an RV because you saw Breaking Bad, you know, like something like that. But so the still basically comes from that. So I started doing these drawings, like two-dimensional drawings on paper of these stills. And then I found a company that could actually take that drawing and turn it into a three-dimensional object. And so what you're looking at is a three-dimensional drawing of a still. And then it's painted to match the gallery color, so it sort of disappears, almost like a ghost chip. So it's very much in line with everything that's in that room, that it talks about class, it talks about race, it talks about, this idea of the absence of self. Those kinds of issues are all tied into the still.
And I'll just add the bobblehead characters. Those are a reference to Deliverance, a 1972 movie. So it relates to this kind of really derogatory way of representing rural white people in this country that is so ubiquitous that it's become really naturalized almost. So I think I've always interpreted that series and that piece as part of, it's like you saying that it's like, your work is about the other. It's about the fear of the other. Mm-hmm. So not even necessarily about black, white. It's just about how our culture has a way of erasing and sort of stowing away, or creating images, in a way, false images of categories of people, and using that image to erase what is actually there, who is actually there.
Right. Also, to that point, that there are 4 characters in the movie Deliverance. These 4 guys go on a canoe trip, and it goes awry. The boat capsizes. They get attacked by these guys. These sort of guys that live in the mountain men and all this. But what you realize is that this is really one man. It's 4 aspects of one person that's going down this river with this fear of otherness. So you have like the Burt Reynolds character, who's like the really strong, macho, sexy guy. And then you have, the professor, like, guy who is fearful of, this, that, and the other. And so you start to realize that these are 4 personalities of one person. And I thought that was interesting because they basically, separated out all of these personalities into different people. So like Ned Beatty is one, and so on and so on.
And we got one more right here, and then we're finished. Okay.
Can you talk about the difficulty in choosing specific imagery to depict in a space for people to consume? Because I know what it's like for me to walk through these spaces. So I want to know what it's like for you as an artist to create this type of work.
The difficulty of creating the space or the object? I don't know if there's difficulty. There's a challenge, There's definitely a challenge. Yeah, there is a difficulty. I think I don't want to make work that's only accessible to one group of people. That would be a problem. If it's, and I think that the one thing that we didn't really get into is a gazillion years ago, Franklin and I went to Paris for one of my first shows in Europe. And at that time, Franklin was writing a lot of poetry, amazing poetry. I started to realize on that trip, we were there for about a month. My dealer rented us an apartment, and I created this show over there. And it was an amazing trip. We did a lot of crazy stuff. We ran around Paris. You can imagine like 2 guys in their 20s getting in a whole lot of trouble in Paris. We can't even talk about that.
Not really.
But one of the things that we did do, I realized, was that imagery that we were making, and it wasn't just me, I realized it was almost like a group. We're getting pigeonholed into one experience. Like our thing was like, oh, that's your American problem. That race thing, that's your American problem. And then I was like, are you kidding me? What are you talking about, man? And at the time, the World Cup was on. And I can't remember the name of the player, but there was a player that played for France who was black. And some kind of mistake, I don't know, it was an own goal or something like that. And on the headline on the newspaper said, the translation was, "The black was the cause of the loss." And I'm like, my man, what is this? And he's just like, well, no, that's different. And I was like, it's not different to me. So, and y'all just wrote that plain as day for everybody across Europe to see. And I started realizing that the work wasn't really translating in that way. Like it was somehow being, it wasn't just my work, it was other people that were making work at the same time. It was getting dismissed as an American problem. Anything to deal with race, otherness, sexuality, things like that was just like, that's your thing. We just deal with French issues, and thank you very much, And so I got back from that trip and I was like, this isn't sitting right with me, man. I got to find a way to create avenues for other experience. I want folks in, Nigeria to access my work. I want people in Morocco to access my work. I want people in, Ukraine, wherever. It was just like, it needs to find a way. And for me at that time, there was a kind of need to start really getting reductive in the imagery that I was selecting. And so I started to really go headlong into like kind of architectural sites, things like a gazebo, which translates across any boundary, right? A roller coaster. Like I'm trying to think of other things that I did at the time. And so these things allowed for people to access their childhood in their own experience. Yeah. And so that's when I realized that the work stepped into another place, that it wasn't just getting like, oh, you Americans and your black thing.
Yeah. It was a specific show, though, too, because the whole show was based off of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner,
Right.
the film. And so it was the combined writing and drawings. And I mention it now, I'm not sure if they're here, but, just a couple of weeks ago, we acquired a drawing from that show. From Emily and Teddy Greenspan from Los Angeles.
That's cool.
So we have a drawing from that exhibition now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Last question. Make it good. Kelly.
Thank you, Gary. Congratulations, and thank you all on the panel for bringing such a great discussion. The young lady pointed out a really interesting question. Pretty much almost asked the same question I wanted to ask, and you answered it very well. And I just think, like, I haven't seen the show, but I see those regions that you leave, those voids, those regions of thought, sort of as a collaborative situation that you create with the viewer and yourself, because then you give them that entitlement to, hey, let me add my conversation to this painting and actually in some way finish it for you.
Yeah.
So are you comfortable with, because most artists want to feel like I finished the painting, and finish the painting is always like a problem for myself.
Yeah.
Because it's like, is it really finished only on your terms?
Yeah.
Or is it finished? So are you comfortable with actually maybe even people seeing something much more advanced, futuristic in the work? And if are you comfortable with that? And if you are does that speak to you that the work is probably even bigger than yourself? It's like it's like a spoked wheel where all these spokes go out to many folks and create this dialogue that creates a round table.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good way of putting it, actually, with the spokes. Yes, absolutely. That's what you want. You don't want, there's no question and answer. You don't want that. That's some dogmatic bullshit. You want like to leave those questions. I want, you know, Netta to look at her painting and she sees something new each time, or she walked past it and she's like, whoa, I never noticed that before. You know, like, or that relates to something that I've seen. And so you want to have that. That's when I at least, I can only speak for myself. That's when I feel most successful, is when I'm going, you know, I'll hear some comment from somebody that I didn't think about that at all. And they kind of imported this thing, and they're, you know, they have a whole other story going on. That's, for me, it's really kind of seeping its way into other people's kind of experience and psyche. And that's really what you want. Otherwise, it's just like, you know, a very A, B, C, this is the answer, move along. That, you would walk away from that. And I think the best art leaves you with more questions, not just one answer.
And yours does that. And it continues to provide more insights and information over the years. I mean, I was giving a tour earlier, and we were in the room with the red, green, and blue wall drawings. And Jonathan from SF MoMA, I don't know if you're still here, mentioned something I didn't know. And mind you, this is an installation I've been thinking about since 2006, okay? When green, red, and blue light come together, it turns into white light. So that piece, white light, if you deconstruct, it's about deconstructing whiteness.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were aware, if this is what you're part of the idea. You know what? I don't really care that much. What I like is that the piece has, it's like your work feels to me always like as spare and as austere and as, in a way, icy. Sometimes it can feel. Sometimes it feels like the opposite. It feels like a garden. Mm-hmm. That just continuously gives and gives and gives.
I like those kinds of layers. I like that you know, he's digging into that on that level. That's the ultimate compliment. So,
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
to
you
all
all.
of you.
thank you all.